Oh, you're here. Good. I've got another betrayal story for you. Sit down. Family dinners were supposed to keep us close, but the night my father raised his glass, he didn't toast me. He gutted me. My name's David Lawson. I'm 37 years old, and the father of a 10-year-old boy named Adam. Most days, I come home tired but proud. But when it comes to my father, Thomas, nothing I do ever measures up. He built his life on control, on being the loudest voice in the room, and family dinners were his stage. That night started like dozens before it. The dining room stretched long with a table my father bought decades ago, polished until you could see your reflection in the wood. The air smelled of roast beef and garlic bread. Candles flickered down the center, but there was no warmth in them. My father sat at the head, shoulders square, the patriarch in command. To his right was my mother, Rachel, who spent most of her time smoothing wrinkles in the tablecloth in conversation, anywhere tension might show. Across from me sat my younger sister, Sarah, eyes sharp, always ready to echo Dad's side of things. Beside her, Matthew, my older brother, the golden child who never needed to defend himself, because our father did it for him. Around them clustered cousins and aunts, everyone laughing too loudly, waiting for my father's approval like schoolchildren raising their hands. And then there was me, third chair down, Adam at my side, legs swinging under his seat. He was excited, proud even, because I'd let him help pick the dessert. He whispered, "Dad, can I say something tonight?" I smiled, nodded, and told him maybe after the toast. I wanted the night to go smoothly. I braced myself for the usual passive-aggressive digs. A comment about how I was wasting my degree teaching kids instead of chasing money. A smirk about renting instead of owning a home. The little daggers he always slipped in. But I thought maybe tonight he'd hold back. Maybe, for Adam's sake, he'd keep it civil. When the plates were cleared, my father stood. He tapped his glass with a spoon, drawing the room into silence. I felt the weight settle before he even spoke. His eyes flicked to me, then back to the family. "I want to raise a glass to my sons," he began, his voice rich with authority. "To Matthew for building something real, providing jobs, making this family proud. And to David," he paused, letting the air stretch thin, "for doing whatever it is he does." Laughter bubbled around the table. I clenched my jaw. He wasn't done. "You know," he continued, "it's one thing to get divorced. Happens to the best of us. But to have your wife run off with someone better? That takes a special kind of failure." The laughter was sharper this time, nervous but complicit. I stared at my plate. Adam's fork clattered as he dropped it. "And Adam," my father said, turning his glass toward my son, "listen carefully. If you want to grow up to be a real man, don't follow your father's example. Look to your Uncle Matthew. That's someone worth admiring." The words hit harder than any slap. Adam's face drained. The room went dead quiet, except for my father's satisfied chuckle. Even Matthew shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't say a word. I wanted to shout, to slam my fist on the table, to wipe the smug grin off his face. Every muscle in me tense, begging for release. But instead, I slid my arm around Adam's shoulders. His small body shook against me. I steadied my voice, lifted my own glass, and finished the toast my father had twisted. "To family," I said. My throat burned, but the words came out clear. "The ones who stand together." A few muttered cheers followed, glasses clinking half-heartedly. My father smirked, certain he had won. He thought he had broken me in front of everyone. But inside, something shifted. I didn't yell that night. I didn't break. What I did was worse. I remembered, and I promised myself, he would never get the satisfaction of watching me crumble. That dinner ended like all the others, with dishes scraped, polite chatter resumed, and the illusion of family intact. But for me, the illusion was gone. I walked Adam out to the car, his hand clenched in mine, and I felt his question before he spoke it. "Dad," he whispered, Why does Grandpa hate you? I had no answer, only silence. And in that silence, I realized this wasn't about me failing. It was about him needing me to fail. My father wanted me erased, smaller, beneath him forever. That was the night the fire started. The night I understood that if I stayed quiet, if I let him keep the stage, then my son would grow up believing him. And that was something I could never allow. The days after that dinner weren't quiet. They were filled with echoes of my father's laughter. It wasn't just a sound I heard in my head. It was the way it traveled, carried through phone calls, whispered conversations, and the silence of people who chose to look away. The first call came the next morning. My cousin Eric. He chuckled as he recounted how Grandpa really went for the jugular. He tried to frame it as a joke, as if I should be in on it. I forced a laugh, my stomach twisting, and hung up as quickly as I could, but the calls kept coming. Aunt's telling me not to take it personally, that Dad has always been like that. And Uncle reminded me that it's better to laugh it off than start a war. Every call felt like a second betrayal. They weren't neutral. They were siding with him by minimizing it, normalizing it. Sarah didn't bother with calls. She showed up at my door. She leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, her voice sharp. You embarrass yourself. Dad was just telling the truth, and you sat there sulking. You could have laughed along, but no, you had to make it awkward. I stared at her, too tired to argue. He humiliated me in front of my son, Sarah. Her lip curled. Maybe he's just trying to push you to be better. God knows someone has to. Then she walked away, leaving her perfume and contempt lingering in the hall. I tried to shake it off, but Adam's voice was harder to ignore. That night, while brushing his teeth, he looked at me through the mirror. His small voice carried more weight than all the family calls combined. Dad was Grandpa, right? Are you not a good dad? It was like being stabbed from the inside. I dropped to my knees, met his eyes, and told him, No, Adam, he's wrong. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. But his eyes searched mine for certainty I couldn't fully give. He wanted proof, not just words. And I realized in that moment, if I didn't confront this, my father's poison would seep into my son. The next evening, my mother called. Rachel's voice was soft, pleading. David, can't you just apologize? Smooth things over? Your father doesn't mean half of what he says. My chest tightened. Apologize? For what? For being mocked in front of Adam? For being called a failure? She sighed, weary, like she'd rehearsed this conversation her whole life. Your father has a temper. You know how he is. Sometimes it's easier to give him what he wants than fight him. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about one dinner. It wasn't about one toast. My father had been shaping the family narrative for years, painting himself as a leader, the arbiter of truth, and the rest of us as pieces he could move around the board. My mother kept the peace by surrendering. Sarah reinforced his power, and Matthew benefited. And me, I was the scapegoat, the one he could break in public to remind everyone else who was in charge. I sat on the couch that night long after Adam fell asleep, staring into the dark, hearing my father's words replay like a broken record. He wasn't just humiliating me. He was training the family to laugh at me, to see me as weak, so his version of me would live longer than the truth ever could. That realization hurt more than his toast, because it meant I wasn't just fighting for my pride. I was fighting for my place in the family, for Adam's belief in me, for the truth of who I was, buried under his voice. And I knew, deep down, that staying silent forever wasn't going to work. If I wanted to stop him, I had to find a way to shift the room, not with fists or shouting, but with something he couldn't control. The ripples of his cruelty were spreading, and sooner or later, they would pull the whole family under. As my father turned the family against me, one person gained the most, my brother Matthew. Matthew had always been the shining star, the firstborn, the one who followed Dad into business, who took advice like gospel and wore success like a tailored suit. I don't think he was born the favorite, but somewhere along the line, He learned how to play the role perfectly. And in my father's world, loyalty wasn't about love. It was about obedience. In the weeks after the dinner, Matthew began stepping into roles that used to be mine, organizing family events, making decisions for my mother without asking, handling things like he was second in command, and Dad rewarded him for it. At Sunday lunch, Thomas clapped him on the back, bragged about his promotion, his house, his new truck, and then turned his eyes to me, smirking like I was a reminder of what not to be. "See," my father said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's how a man provides. That's how you make something of yourself. Not scribbling in notebooks and babysitting teenagers for a living." Laughter circled the table like vultures. I felt my face flush, but I kept eating, my fork scraping against plate like a metronome counting down my patience. Matthew didn't defend me. He smiled modestly, but didn't protest. And why would he? Being the golden child meant keeping the crown polished, even if it was stained with blood. I left early that day, Adam in tow, my father's words echoing in my son's silence. Adam didn't ask questions, but I saw the weight in his eyes. He didn't need to. He was watching all unfold. The hierarchy, the cruelty, the way power bent everyone at that table. That night, I sat outside on the porch, the air biting cold, when Clara slid into the chair beside me. My aunt had always been quiet at dinners, her eyes down, her fork moving methodically. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was usually small talk. But that night, she lit a cigarette, blew the smoke into the air, and said, "You know this isn't new, right?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" She tap dashed into a dish. "Your father, the way he's treating you. He did the same thing to your Uncle James." I blinked. James left years ago. He barely calls. I thought he just moved on. Clara shook her head. Her voice trembled, not from the cold, but from memory. "He didn't move on. He was pushed out. Your father made it impossible for him to stay. Every dinner, every gathering, he tore him down. Said he was weak. Said he wasn't good enough. And eventually, James broke. He left to save himself. But the family believed your father's version, that James was a failure. That's why he never comes back." The cigarette burned low between her fingers as she glanced at me. "You're standing where James stood. And your father, he won't stop. He doesn't want equals. He only wants followers." Her words landed heavier than my father's insults, because they weren't just about me. They were about history repeating itself. And suddenly I saw the pattern. My father building up one son while crushing the other, keeping us divided, ensuring loyalty through fear, and using family dinners as his arena. I thought back to all the times as kids when Matthew and I competed for his attention, how praise for one of us always meant scorn for the other. I thought it was sibling rivalry, natural competition. But Clara's words reframed everything. It wasn't rivalry. It was manipulation. He had designed it that way. At the next gathering, it was clearer than ever. Dad raised his glass again, his favorite weapon. He toasted Matthew's new investment property, bragging about how this family knows how to build wealth. Then his eyes slid to me. And then there's David, still chasing essays and poetry. Maybe one day he'll figure out the real world. Laughter again. But this time, it didn't sting the same way. I looked around the table and noticed who laughed too loudly, who shifted uncomfortably, and who avoided my gaze. And in that moment, I understood this wasn't just cruelty. It was control, a performance designed to keep me in place, and Matthew on the pedestal. Clara caught my eye across the table. She didn't smile and nod, but her look said it all. "You see it now." When dinner ended, I walked out of the car. He slipped his hand into mine and whispered, "Dad, do you wish you were like Uncle Matthew?" I stopped cold. My throat tightened. I knelt in front of him, looked him in the eyes, and said, "No, Adam, I just wish your grandfather could see me for who I am. And one day you'll see too. That's all that matters." As he climbed into the car, I realized this wasn't about me versus Matthew. It had never been. This was about breaking a cycle, one that had already claimed Uncle James, that was now targeting me, and that would keep going until someone stood up and refused to play the game. That night, staring into the dark, Clara's words repeated in my head. He doesn't want equals. He only wants followers. And for the first time, I knew I couldn't keep waiting for my father to change. I had to be the one who broke the pattern. Knowing the truth didn't make it easier to endure the next dinner. But I had made my decision. I wouldn't fight with rage. I'd fight by not breaking. The following month, we gathered again at my parents' house. The long dining table was set like always. Plates gleaming, silver polished, my mother fluttering about with last-minute adjustments. Adam tugged at my sleeve as we walked in, his shoulders stiff. He hated these nights almost as much as I did, though he didn't have the words to say it. Thomas sat at the head of the table, his throne. The family assembled like actors in a play, each with a part. Sarah leaning forward eagerly, Matthew wearing the smug calm of favorite son, my mother wringing her hands in invisible worry. I took my seat, Adam beside me. I'd promised myself. Whatever happened tonight, I wouldn't give my father the explosion he wanted. Dinner began with forced politeness. Small talk about the weather, work, and school. I could feel Thomas watching me, biding his time, the way a cat toys with prey before the strike. Then, as plates were cleared, he tapped his glass. "Let's talk about responsibility," he began, his voice carrying through the room. "Some men build something lasting, like Matthew, new business deal, a second property. That's what it means to take care of family." His eyes shifted to me, a gleam of satisfaction already there. And then some men just scrape by, still renting, still struggling, teaching middle school kids when he should be teaching his own son how to be a man. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved around the table, thinner this time. I felt Adam shrink against me, his small frame folding inward. My chest burned, but I didn't flinch. I lifted my fork, speared a piece of potato, and calmly ate as if his word were nothing but air. Thomas wasn't expecting silence. He leaned forward, doubling down. "Tell me, David, do you even have a plan? Or are you hoping your boy will bail you out when you're old?" I turned my head, looked at Adam, and smiled gently. "My plan," I said quietly, "is to make sure he grows up knowing kindness matters more than cruelty." The room froze. It wasn't loud. It wasn't defiant. But it landed. Sarah snorted, muttering something under her breath. Matthew shifted uncomfortably. Across the table, Clara raised her eyes to me and gave the smallest of nods. And for the first time, I saw cracks in the laughter. People glancing at one another realized that my father's cruelty wasn't as funny as it used to be. Thomas's jaw tightened. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to yell, to storm out, to confirm his narrative of weakness. But all I gave him was stillness. Dinner dragged on. Conversation limped. And when it was finally over, I walked Adam to the car, his hand clutching mine with quiet gratitude. He whispered, "You didn't let him win." And that was enough. But the night wasn't finished. My mother caught me at the door, her face pale, eyes wet. "David, please," she whispered. "Can't you just be the bigger man? He's your father. He doesn't mean everything he says." I stared at her, stunned. "Be the bigger man? Mom, he humiliates me in front of my son. In front of you. And you want me to apologize for it?" Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I just want peace." I shook my head. Peace isn't the same thing as silence. You've been confusing the two for years. She flinched like I had slapped her and turned away. Watching her retreat, I realized how deep his control ran. Even she couldn't separate love from submission. Driving home, Adam leaned against a window, quiet but smiling faintly. And I knew then my silence was a weakness. It was my weapon. Every time I refused to break, my father's obsession became clearer to the rest of them. They were starting to see who he really was. A man who needed someone to crush in order to stand tall. And sooner or later, that truth would break him. Months of dinners, months of silence. And then, finally, the moment came when I broke that silence. By then, the routine was familiar. Every gathering ended the same way. My father finding some excuse to mock me, the others shifting in their seats, laughter forced or uneasy. I had learned to endure, to let his words bounce off while keeping my focus on Adam. But silence wasn't forever. It was patience. And patience has its breaking point. That night, the table was crowded again. The roast was carved, the wine poured, and everyone seated according to tradition. My father at the head, Matthew on his right, me 3 seats down with Adam at my side. I could feel the tension before it began, like a storm gathering. As dessert was served, my father tapped his glass. The familiar chimes silenced the room. His eyes flicked toward me, smug. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced. "To Matthew, once again proving what a real man looks like. Promotions, property, leadership. That's how it's done. And then, well, there's David." He chuckled. Still playing teacher. Still chasing children's essays as though that's a career. Maybe one day he'll grow up. There were weak laughs around the table, but fewer than before. I saw Clara shift. Sarah roll her eyes like she'd heard it all before, and Adam drop his gaze to his lap. My father raised his glass higher. So here's to Matthew, the son who didn't disappoint me. That was when I put my fork down, slowly, deliberately. The scrape of metal on china cut the silence. All eyes turned to me. I lifted my glass, not in toast, but as if weighing it. My voice came steady, calm. "Tell me something, Dad. Why did Uncle James really leave?" The room froze. Forks hovered midair, glasses paused. My father's smile faltered for the first time in years. "What?" His voice was sharp, warning. "You know," I continued, my eyes locked on his. "Uncle James, your brother, the one who stopped coming to dinners, the one you called weak. Why did he really walk away?" Whispers fluttered around the table. My mother's hand trembled on her napkin. Clara's face went pale, her eyes fixed on me. Thomas slammed his glass down, wine sloshing. "Don't you dare bring him up at this table. James was a coward, nothing more. He turned his back on this family." "No," I said quietly. "He turned his back on you." The words hung in the air like a blade. My father surged his feet, face red, voice rising. "You think you're different? You're the same. Weak, ungrateful, a burden. James betrayed me, and now you do the same. You'll never be half the man Matthew is." The eruption shook the table. Plates rattled. My mother wept softly into her hands, and Sarah shouted at me to stop. Matthew stood, trying to calm Dad, but Thomas shoved his arm away. He was unraveling in real time, years of control cracking under the pressure. And then out of the chaos came the quietest voice. "Adam." He looked up from his plate, eyes wide but steady. His voice was small, but it carried across the table. "Grandpa, why you hate my dad so much?" The room went still. Forks lowered. Conversations died. Every eye turned to my father. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His face twisted, his jaw clenched, but no words followed. For the first time, the patriarch who always had an answer, always had the final word, stood speechless. Adam's question lingered in the silence, heavier than any accusation I could have made. Clara exhaled shakily, tears in her eyes. My mother sobbed openly. Even Matthew looked away, shame creeping into his expression. My father sat down slowly, his shoulders slumped, his glare darting around the table as if daring someone to rescue him. But no one did, not this time. I placed my arm around Adam and pulled him close. For once, I didn't feel small at that table. I didn't feel erased. The power had shifted, not because I shouted louder, but because the truth had finally spoken, out of the mouth of a child who refused to inherit the cycle. The dinner ended in fragments. Conversation stilted. no laughter filling the air. People left quickly, avoiding my father's eyes. And as I walked at him to the car, I realized something. I hadn't destroyed him. He had destroyed himself the moment he couldn't answer his grandson's question. That was the turning point. The night the cracks in his authority became impossible to ignore, and it all began with silence until it didn't. After that night, family dinners didn't feel the same. The man who once ruled the table now sat in silence. It was subtle at first. The same table was set, the same chairs filled, but the laughter didn't come as easily. When my father tried his usual jokes, they landed flat. People shifted in their seats, exchanged glances, or pretended not to hear. His voice no longer carried the weight it once had. Relatives began distancing themselves, not from the family itself, but from him. The cousins who once laughed at his digs stayed quiet. An uncle excused himself early, muttering about work. Even Matthew, his golden child, seemed less willing to sit in his shadow. But not everyone softened. Sarah came to me one evening, her tone sharp as glass. "You humiliated him," she spat. "You think you're some kind of hero, but all you did was tear this family apart. He's our father. You should have protected him, not attacked him." I stared at her, searching for some trace of doubt, but there was none. She clung to his side, loyal to the image of him she couldn't afford to lose. In her eyes, I was a traitor, the one who had shattered the illusion she needed. Clara was different. My aunt found me after one gathering, pulling me aside into the kitchen while the others cleared dishes. Her hand trembled as it rested on my arm. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saying what I never could, for making them see him for who he is." I carried that weight for decades, and I thought I'd die with it. Tears welled in her eyes. "You gave me something I didn't think I'd ever have, proof that I wasn't crazy." Her words steadied me more than she knew. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. Rachel, my mother, was another story. She avoided me at first, then finally sat across from me at her kitchen table, her teacup trembling in her hands. "David," she said softly, "why couldn't you let it go? He's old. He's set in his ways. Couldn't you have just ignored him?" I swallowed hard. "Mom, he humiliated me in front of Adam, over and over. He did it to Uncle James, and he was going to keep doing it until there was nothing left of me. How could I stay silent?" Her eyes filled, but not with agreement. "Because silence keeps the peace," she said. "And now there's nothing but cracks." I realized then she wasn't blaming me for being wrong. She was blaming me for breaking the pattern, for exposing what she'd spent a lifetime covering up. And maybe, in her way, she was right. Peace had been shattered, but it had been a false peace, bought at the cost of everyone else's dignity. The final image that stays with me came months later. Another dinner, smaller this time. Fewer relatives showed up now. Excuses piled up, and the seats stayed empty. The long table felt cavernous. Adam sat beside me, laughing at a story I told about his soccer game. For once, his laughter wasn't shadowed by tension. He leaned into me, proud, unashamed. Across the table, Clara chuckled softly, her eyes kind. A pocket of warmth existed where once there had been only fear. And at the far end of the table sat Thomas, the patriarch, the man who had once commanded the room. He sat hunched, his fork moving aimlessly across his plate. No one waited for him to speak. No one asked for his approval. He was a king without a crown, a voice without an audience. I didn't gloat. There was no victory in watching your father fade, but there was clarity. He had wanted to break me with humiliation. Instead, his need to dominate had exposed him to everyone. His fall wasn't from my rage, but from his own reflection, finally seen through the eyes of those he once controlled. The family was fractured, maybe beyond repair. Sarah wouldn't forgive me. My mother would never see me the same. But Adam, my son, knew the truth. He saw strength not in shouting, not in winning, but in refusing to bend. And that was enough. What would you have done if your own father humiliated you in front of the entire family? Would you have stayed silent like I did, or exploded right then and there? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more betrayal stories like this one, don't forget to hit subscribe.